Okay, let's take a look at a strengthening question. The first thing I want you to focus on is, of course, the question stem. And I want you to notice how similar it is to weakening in RRE. Right? It says, which one of the following, if true? So the answer choices are taken to be true now. This is not like most strongly supported must be true, point at issue, or even main point, main conclusion, where we looked at the answers with skepticism, asking, hey, can I really prove this from the stimulus? No, the other way around. Just like weakening, just like RRE, this is taken to be true, and the correct answer choice is the one that affects the stimulus in the right way, which means strengthen this time. Okay, strengthen the therapist's argument. So we have to look at the therapist's argument, and being an argument, there is at least going to be a conclusion, premise, possibly context. There's going to be, all the grammar lessons come into play here. I already spot the than, which means great, it's comparative, right? Okay, so let's take a look. Cognitive psychotherapy focuses on changing a patient's conscious beliefs. I'm already lost, right? This is not like kittens and puppies. This is stuff that you probably don't think about too much. So yeah, these concepts might float right over your head without making contact. That's not good. Right? Even if you're not, like, I've never been to therapy, so I don't really have firsthand experience of what that's like, but I've heard of it. I can at least take a second to stop and just tell myself, like, look, they're talking about some sort of therapeutic behavioral intervention, right? So whatever this is, cognitive psychotherapy. What about it? Well, it has a certain focus. What's the focus? The focus is on changing someone's conscious beliefs. And again, if I don't think about this phrase, I might not make contact with its meaning. But if I do just stop and think about it, I know what beliefs are, right? I believe I am in this room right now. I believe I'm speaking. And then just modify it. Conscious beliefs. Okay, so conscious beliefs, the beliefs that I am aware of, as opposed to unconscious beliefs, right? The ones that I'm not conscious of. Fine. So now I have at least some handle on what we're dealing with. This type of psychotherapy called cognitive psychotherapy. What is its focus? Changing my conscious beliefs. Okay. And now I get hit with a conclusion. Thus, right? Thus. And the conclusion is the comparative claim. So I'm going to try to be very careful here in, this is all good practices when you're studying, when you're prepping for this, map this out, right? It's a comparative claim. I'm going to be very careful in mapping this out, right? What are we talking about? Thus, cognitive psychotherapy, which is the thing we just told you about, right? The thing that focuses on the conscious beliefs, is likely to be more effective at helping patients overcome psychological problems. That sounds like the point of comparison, which one is more effective, than our what? Than our forms of psychotherapy that focus on changing unconscious beliefs and desires. And before I get to the sense, which of course is the premise, I better just map out the two things that I'm talking about. On the one hand, I'm talking about cognitive psychotherapy, right? Versus other forms, right? Other forms. So I'll just call that non-cognitive psychotherapy. They didn't say what other, what they're called. No names were given. I'll just say other types, right? Non-cognitive types of psychotherapy. And this other form, they focus on changing unconscious beliefs and desires. So the focus here, right? What makes you not cognitive psychotherapy is because you focus on unconscious beliefs and desires, right? Unconscious beliefs. Whereas cognitive psychotherapy, see, this is where the context kicks in, right? Often this is what context does. It serves as referent for something in your conclusion. We've seen this pattern play out, where therapists may say something like, oh, some psychotherapists believe X, Y, and Z, but they are wrong, right? That's a situation where the same thing, context, other people's positions serve as a referent for you to figure out what your conclusion actually means. Here, it's not explicit, but it's implicit, right? Since they already told you what cognitive psychotherapy focuses on, next time they say cognitive psychotherapy, you got to bring all this baggage and just carry it with you, right? Because it's pointing back to this. So here, the focus is precisely on, right? Unlike this one, unconsciously, focus precisely on conscious beliefs, right? So now you got the two things that you're comparing against. One is the type of psychotherapy that focuses on unconscious beliefs. The other is a type of psychotherapy that focuses on conscious beliefs. What are we comparing them on? Well, just effectiveness, right? Effectiveness. And which one wins? This one wins. Now, here I think it's worth making this general point that whenever you're talking about therapeutic interventions, whether it's pharmacological or behavioral, you're pretty much concerned about largely two things, efficacy and safety. right? Those are your main goals. So here, they don't care so much about safety. They're just focused the conclusion. You can see just, they only talk about efficacy, right? Fine. So they're talking about efficacy. Now, that's the conclusion. Why? Do you see, up to this point, I've been given absolutely zero reason to believe that this type of psychotherapy is more effective than this type of psychotherapy. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't know if this is true. You have to convince me this is true. And here comes the premise, right? Look, only conscious beliefs are under patients' direct control. Okay, so that's a distinction, right? On the one hand, I have conscious beliefs. On the other hand, I have unconscious beliefs. And they're saying only this type is under patients' direct control. Fine. So this is under direct, which means this is not, right? This is not under patients' direct control. Okay, now I have all the information from the argument mapped out. Now let's start over, but in order this time, from the premise to the conclusion, right? This is not something I am going to question. The premise is what it is. It's true, okay? It's true. You got these two types of beliefs, conscious versus unconscious, and it's just true that conscious beliefs are under patients' direct control and the unconscious ones are not under patients' direct control. That's what I know, and that's all I know. How in the world do I move from that claim to the claim about the efficacy of psychotherapies that focus on conscious beliefs versus the efficacy of psychotherapies that focus on unconscious beliefs? Do you see how, if the information in the argument wasn't presented in this ass backwards way, I don't think this argument would have any persuasive force at all, right? Because, okay, let me bring back the spectrum here along which the support from this premise moving into this conclusion, along which the support can fall. Where are you going to put this? Where's this going to land? See, I would take the support, I would land it just about here, merely consistent. The reason is because I just don't see, I don't understand why, right? Like, I don't understand why the fact that conscious beliefs are under a patient's direct control versus unconscious beliefs are not, I don't see why that would make this type of psychotherapy, which focuses on conscious beliefs, more effective than this type of psychotherapy that focuses on unconscious beliefs. For all I know, it's a bad thing to focus on things that are under your direct control. Could be a good thing to focus on things that are not under your direct control. Do you see what I mean? That's why I would land it at merely consistent. In an argument like this, where they haven't even done the bare minimum work of connecting ideas together, you've got a real good shot at anticipating what the right answer is. Now, I said earlier in weakening questions that I tend not to anticipate, because in weakening questions, the information comes from the real world. There's just a lot that could be happening. And that, generally speaking, applies to strengthening questions as well. But sometimes you're just given this gift from the LSAT writers where the gap is so huge, so glaring, so structural that the argument as it currently exists can hardly be called an argument, because the relationship is just merely that of consistency. You haven't done the basic amount of work that it takes to make your premise relevant to your conclusion. So let's look at how the correct answer choice fills in this gap. Right? How does the correct answer choice takes the argument which currently support structure sits over here, and how it moves it really powerfully to somewhere over here. Okay, now again, I just want to say it didn't have to do that. You don't have to make this much movement to be a correct answer choice. I can totally imagine some other correct answer choice which moved the support structure just a little bit, and that would still be fine. Okay, but it just so happens that this answer choice is very powerful. B says, it is difficult for any form of psychotherapy, any form, whether you're cognitive or non-cognitive, any form of psychotherapy, it's just difficult for you to be effective if you don't focus on mental states that are under patients' direct conscious control. Right? Think about that. I automatically applied the without group 3 logical transformation, right? We're talking about any form of psychotherapy. I don't care whether you're cognitive or non-cognitive or whatever name you want to call it, any form of cognitive therapy. If you don't focus on mental states that are under patients' direct conscious control, then it's going to be difficult for you to be effective. Of these two, which one is the one that's not focusing on mental states that are under patients' direct control? This one. So you see, this type of non-cognitive psychotherapy satisfies this condition, which means we can push it over here. That means it's going to be difficult for this to be effective. And that's the way in which B helps the argument. B works together with the existing premise, right? It works together with the existing premise. The existing premise tells us distinction between unconscious beliefs and conscious beliefs. This is the stuff that's under your direct control. B further tells us the relevance of that distinction. Why do we care that this is under your direct control and this is not? Well, it's because if you're a type of psychotherapy that focuses on stuff that's not under your direct control, then it's very unlikely for you to be effective. Now, these two claims together really strongly support that you're comparing the two. Well, this is the one that's likely, right? That's likely to be the more effective one. Do you see what I mean? Like, now the support goes over here. Okay, now I want to look at a very attractive wrong answer choice, which is D. Okay, it's wrong, but it's very attractive. It's the most attractive wrong answer choice. And I want to look at it side by side with B to show you how similar D is to B. And it's not a coincidence, right? The LSAT writers did this on purpose. First of all, I recognize the logical indicator here, unless, without, both are group 3, both are negate sufficient, right? We already said for this one over here, they've set out a domain that they say, look, if you're talking about any form of psychotherapy, unqualified, right? They didn't say, oh, any form of psychotherapy that requires being in a doctor's office, or no, unqualified. So any form of psychotherapy, the following conditional claim is true. If you don't focus, right? If you don't focus on, and I'll just omit the rest of it, but know that it's in here. If you don't focus on mental states under patient's direct conscious control, it's going to be difficult for you to be effective. I can't even really put ineffective because that's not what it's saying. They're saying it's difficult, right, to be effective. It'll be hard for you to be effective. D in some ways is a better and worse version of B. It's better here, it's worse here, and it's just different, but not in a way that matters here. Okay, so let me explain what I mean by that. Again, recognize unless, which is negate sufficient, group 3, right? The two ideas are over here. This time, notice that we're not talking about any form of psychotherapy. We are talking about a subset of psychotherapy that focuses on changing patients' unconscious beliefs, right? Which means really we're talking about this, because this is the type that focuses on changing unconscious beliefs and desires. So here, the type of psychotherapy we're talking about is different. So I'll just mark it with an asterisk, right? It's not just this unrestricted set anymore. But if you're, as long as you're talking about psychotherapy that fits this asterisk definition, then this rule applies, right? This rule applies, right? You cannot be effective if what? If it doesn't help, right? You take this, it's group 3, we said, negate sufficient, so help becomes not help. And again, I'm omitting the rest of this, right? But understand that it goes in here, of course. You're not helping to change beliefs that are under patient's direct conscious control. Then what? Then the rest of the idea just gets dropped in over here. Then it's not going to be effective, right? It's not going to be effective. Oh, I think I ended it should be over here. Okay, so you see what I mean when I say this is actually better in the necessary condition, right? Because for B, you trigger this, that only takes us to, oh, it's difficult for you to be effective. But we said, we trigger it, right? Because this thing is precisely not focusing on direct conscious control. So, okay, that takes us to, well, then it's going to be difficult for you to be effective. Whereas for D, they're not mincing words here. If this is trigger, you're just straight up ineffective. Well, yeah, I prefer that, right? Because I'm trying to argue the conclusion, trying to say that, therefore, this is more effective. So if I can get something to tell me this is straight up ineffective, I would take this. But the problem is that it's worse over here, whereas B actually allows us to fit, right? You see, the non-cognitive psychotherapy, which focuses on unconscious beliefs, which are not under direct control, actually fits into this, allows us to trigger and push over to this direction. D doesn't give us that route. There is no triggering here. And I think you see that, right? I think you see that if you focus on the word, focus versus help. Do you know, okay, non-cognitive psychotherapy focuses on unconscious beliefs, which are not under direct control. Okay, fine. So that's all well and good. Definitely doesn't focus on things that are under your control. But does that mean it doesn't help to change beliefs that are under your direct control? I don't know. Do you see what I mean? Like, you need to make an assumption in order for D to do its job. I mean, I can imagine the world being such that if you focus on X, then that only helps with X and it doesn't help with Y. Or I can also imagine the world is such that if you focus on X, in some indirect way, it actually does help with Y. And I just don't know in the discipline of psychotherapy which of those two worlds is true. What I do know is that this answer choice isn't asking me to take a stance on that assumption, one way or the other, right? This answer choice, because the word just matches, it just doesn't matter which of those two worlds is the real world, whereas D needs that assumption to turn out one way or the other. And that's a mark of weakness in an answer choice. Okay, so we're doing strengthening questions, right? Like, you're down to 2 answer choices. It's always the answer choice that itself requires fewer assumptions that's the better answer choice. In other words, the answer choice that requires more assumptions, additional assumptions, is the worst answer choice. And this is, this answer choice requires an assumption before you can take this type of psychotherapy and pop it into the sufficient condition to get the result that you want. Okay, and this comes from very careful reading. I think if you're the type of person who got stuck between B and D, I don't actually think it's the logic that got you, right? Because you can see the logical form is the same. I think rather it's the conceptual clarity of one idea versus another idea, and realizing that, oh, this idea is the idea that we're talking about. This idea is only adjacent to the idea that we're talking about. I'm not sure the relationship between a type of psychotherapy that focuses on a thing versus a type of psychotherapy that helps with some other thing. Now, the next 3 answer choices are, of course, all wrong, but let's have a look at them. C says cognitive psychotherapy is the only form of psychotherapy, that's this one, right? Is the only form that focuses primarily on changing patients' conscious beliefs. So this is giving us additional information, right? In the argument, we were told that cognitive psychotherapy focuses on changing patients' conscious beliefs. Could it be that others also focus on that? It's not clear. C clears it up. C's like, you know what? Not only does this thing focus on this thing is the only thing that focuses primarily on this thing. So no other thing is like it. Okay, great, thanks. But hopefully you see that still doesn't help at all, in fact, because we never resolve the central issue of, is it a good thing? Right? Because here the conclusion says, it says that it's effective, right? That therefore it's effective, which assumes that it's a good thing that you're focusing on this. And, we already talked about with B, how B reveals that, yeah, in fact, it is good to focus on this. And in fact, if you don't focus on this, it's very difficult for you to be effective. C doesn't do any of that work. If anything, C's kind of just free riding off of B, right? If B already does the work that B is doing, then C becomes relevant. Then C kind of helps out. C kind of closes the fence, so to speak, right? Like, you know what, B, you're doing your work here, having direct control over conscious beliefs, that's actually a good thing. Now let me help out, and I'm going to say that not only is cognitive psychotherapy a type of psychotherapy that focuses on conscious beliefs, no other types of psychotherapy primarily does this. So I'm booting out everybody else, right? Okay, that's fine, right? That's fine, but only if you already make the assumption that focusing primarily on changing conscious beliefs is a good thing, that it leads to a therapy being effective, right? Okay, so I mentioned this because, again, I want you to start to be familiar with the tricks. These are repetitive, right? LSAT writers know that you tend to read the answers in order. So they know that by the time you get to C, you've already read B. Okay, so B, in some sense, has already been seeded in your mind. And with, like I said, if you already take the argument to be argument plus answer choice B, well, then C also works to help the argument. I mean, a little bit, right? But C also works. But you can't do that, right? Because, the argument is not argument plus answer choice B. The argument is just the argument. And on its own, right, C on its own does no work. It completely avoids. I mean, it's like, the very same gap that already existed still exists. Okay, let's look at A, which says psychological problems are frequently caused by unconscious beliefs that could be changed with the aid of psychotherapy. Now, I want you to focus on this word, cause. Because we're talking about psychotherapy, you can just take for granted that there's some problem, right? Like, we're talking about psychotherapy. This is what I call one of those common sense assumptions, right? There's some problem. There's some psychological problem, which is why we're talking about psychotherapy to begin with. Okay, we are talking about different types of treatments and which type of treatment is more effective. What is A talking about? The cause of the problem to begin with. How in the world is that going to be helpful? I mean, it could be helpful, I suppose, if the existing premises drew a link between the cause of a problem and its solution. Then maybe talking about causes could be helpful. But that is not at all what our existing premise does, right? So let me give you an analogy here. Say we're talking about whether surgery or physical therapy is the better solution to your broken leg. Answer choice A talks about how your leg was broken in the first place. Now, maybe if your existing premises tried to link the cause of a thing, right, the cause of a problem to the solution, then maybe talking about the cause could be helpful. But as you can see, I mean, this answer choice is not at all talking about that. This answer choice just gives you some distinction between these two types, like, oh, physical, or what did I say, surgery here? Surgery focuses on something. Physical therapy focuses on something else. Okay, this thing versus this other thing. Oh, this thing has this characteristic. Do you see what I mean? Like, there's just no way for A to help an argument like this. Okay, and finally, let's look at answer choice E. All of a patient's conscious beliefs are under the patient's conscious control. Fine, but other psychological states cannot be controlled effectively without the aid of psychotherapy. So we're saying all of this is under this, but other psychological states, right? Conscious beliefs is one psychological state, other psychological states. What about them? Something about them being controlled with or without psychotherapy. Wow, great, right? Great. How does that resolve whether this treatment regime is more effective or this treatment regime is more effective? No idea, right? Completely useless answer.